Hello, welcome to Worst Quality Crab, a podcast of Asian American recipes and stories from best quality hearts. I'm your host, Freesia Lee, and with me is my husband and partner in this journey, Sam.
Hello.
We are starting this podcast about cooking and stories and what it's like to be Asian American and the interplay of food in all of that. And rather than spend time in the episodes talking about the why and how we got this name, we thought we would do this short little intro so that you could find out everything here. And then you can just dive right into the episodes and get going on all of the yumminess over there.
So, Freesia, why are we here and how did this all come about?
Why are we here? That is a good question. Well, way back in 2020, at the beginning of quarantine, I was having a conversation with a friend/client of mine, and she was talking about how she was missing her family and she wanted to be like cooking dishes that were familiar to her and sort of like family comfort foods, but she didn't really feel like she had any, not really in the way that she was kind of seeing other people were cooking their most cherished family recipes and, you know, posting it on social. And then she came to realize that her family recipes, the ones that were like most important to her, were actually the ones that her dad would make just kind of randomly on a weeknight for her and her brothers. And they were super imperfect and, you know, pretty easy, but really yummy. And those were actually the ones that she like remembered the most as a kid and had the most nostalgia for her. And so she started cooking those a little bit. And it just really got me thinking about how there were probably a lot of people out there that had similar stories around the food that they grew up eating, and the things that brought them the most nostalgia weren't necessarily like, what's the one thing that got made at Christmas? Or, you know, what was the one big like Chinese New Year dish? But it was probably like a lot of things that they ate so many times that they stopped thinking about them and stopped really thinking that they were like special recipes. But now as adults, they might be super interested in them. And so my original sort of dream for this was actually a cookbook, and it would be stories and recipes, and it would just be like, you know, a way to get to know other people's culture and also their foods. And I actually thought a lot about like people that maybe didn't have a lot of food history for themselves and food nostalgia for themselves, being able to see these recipes and cook them for themselves and then like start to build their own sort of nostalgia around it, or just get a better sense of like what other people's lives were like. And also at the time we were seeing just a ton of Asian hate and Asian communities feeling, you know, isolated, but also coming together. And I just thought that this would be a really nice way for like a form of Asian representation for people to see themselves and see, you know, their own foods and their own like Asian cultures represented and hear other people talk about them. And I think what was also so interesting for me is this idea that so much happens at home that people don't talk about, like particularly in Asian families, right? Like there are the things that we do at home or that we cook at home that no one really talks about because it's like not mainstream American culture. And so maybe kids aren't talking about it when they're at school. And then come to find out later that like, oh, no, everybody does this, or your friends were having the same experience or the same foods or like the same feelings even, but nobody really talked about them because they weren't able to, or it didn't seem like appropriate or just comfortable doing it. And this being a way for people to sort of like have themselves be seen and validated and know that they weren't alone in a lot of things, maybe see a little bit of themselves and their own history and family in some of these other recipes and these stories. And then the flip of that too, really just shedding a light on like how the Asian American experience is so unique. It is not one thing. It means, you know, something totally different across different Asian cultures and, you know, first, second, fourth, fifth generation and what that's like, but that it all counts, right? It all counts as part of the Asian American experience. None of it is excluded, whether you are, you know, first generation or you are like fifth generation and also biracial. It all falls under the umbrella and it all is valid and valuable. And this being a way to see a little piece of that, especially as someone who is in fact fifth generation and biracial, but very much leans more into my Chinese culture and Chinese side of things. And so I guess in some ways, like wanting to even create a space for myself to feel more valid in my experiences and not really downplaying my Asianness just because my family's been here so long. And sometimes I present as pretty white depending on the room that I'm in. So this was for me as well. And then, we sat on this for a long time. And then you were like, what about podcast? And I was swayed. And now here we are.
What attracted me to this concept was celebrating the everyday and like presenting maybe an image of Asian America that's not really well known or well celebrated, and just pointing out the nuances in Asian American people's lives and kind of forming this more three-dimensional picture of us. We can kind of express ourselves as full humans and not something to be feared
Totally.
or hated on.
Absolutely. And I think even aside from the hate part of things and like how Asian Americans are seen to non-Asian Americans, particularly white people, but I think there is something in being able to see something of yourself in someone who is like you that really helps to validate your own feelings and also allows for greater self-expression. And so my hope for this is that people can listen, they can hear about food, they can hear people's stories, and they can both see a little bit more of themselves in the food and the stories and get a better understanding of what other people's Asian American experiences were like. And from that, be able to more fully express themselves because they feel validation, they understand the nuance, they understand that like everything is okay under the umbrella.
Yeah, it's all about being seen and heard.
Yes. So the other thing that we wanted to talk about in this intro is the name of this podcast. For some of you, if you know, you get the reference, but others may not. And even if you do, maybe you're curious about why we named our podcast Worst Quality Crab. Sam, you came up with this name.
Yeah.
So how did this come to be?
It was just a familiar phrase to me. It was food related and from a major Asian American motion picture. And I kind of just thought it fit at the time. A deeper meaning didn't really come to me until like later on while I was like really, really thinking about it. The phrase worst quality crab comes from the 1993 film Joy Luck Club, directed by Wayne Wong, based on a novel by Amy Tan. And it's for Asian Americans of a certain age, particularly Chinese Americans. It's basically a meme, and it comes from a very emotionally heavy scene. And I like to refer back to it almost jokingly just because it's so heavy. But it resonates so much with the overall feelings I have towards my family in a way. I actually have a short clip of it. Let's take a listen.
That bad crab. Only you try to take it. Everybody else want best quality. You're thinking different. Waverly took best quality crab. You took worst. Because you have best quality heart.
And there it is.
Love it. Iconic.
Yeah, the scene is between a daughter character named June and her mother, Soo Yun, played by Ming Na Wen and Kyu Chin, respectively. And I always remember it as you take the worst quality crab because you have the best quality heart.
It is, in fact, not in the movie.
Right.
And I maintain that this is the Asian American Bernstein Bears or Mandela effect of a thing that we all think existed, but doesn't truly.
I think it's funny that whenever I remember it, and I've spoken to other friends about this scene too, they kind of always remember it as like the worst quality crab, that part. And I just find it funny that I kind of tend to focus on the negative aspect of it and not necessarily the best quality heart aspect of it. And I think it feels very Asian of me to Focus on the negative.
Is that why you thought of it for this? This is the first I'm hearing of this.
Sort of.
Folks at home.
It's sort of like,
Genuinely.
I think it is representative of the culture and the podcast at large. It's trying to take it all in, the good and the bad. Like, these meals might not necessarily have been the most show-stopping and in some ways were very commonplace, but the intent and the thought behind it has always been from a good place, from a place of caring, from a place of being seen.
From a best quality heart.
From a best quality heart. And even though, you know, the food might not be fancy, the food might be maybe sometimes the worst quality, I mean, the intent behind it has always been the best quality.
Legitimately, I knew none of that when I agreed to the title of this podcast. And I agreed to it immediately.
Because you understood the intent, even though it was unseen.
Right. Even though it was unsaid, I understood your best quality heart intent in naming it this.
Exactly.
But it also immediately resonated because for me, it was like, you know, earliest memory of Asian American representation. And it is one of those movies or pieces of media where like food isn't the centerpiece, but it so clearly communicates where food lands in the culture and in community. And there are such good, like iconic food scenes in that film.
Russell Wong eating a watermelon very provocatively.
Yes, absolutely. I'm like, that, yeah, when you suggested it, I was like, that's it exactly. That's perfect. And also because like, without you saying anything else, I knew the implications of it, right? Like I knew what worst quality crab means in the scene in the film. I know what it means like out in the wild with other Chinese Americans of our age. And so I knew people would get it. And I think also like for me, that was sort of the point of like, we all have this shared experience that may or may not really exist, but you know, we all also relate to it differently. And so like in a lot of ways, it was perfect in that sense for me.
Right.
And so I think that, you know, as we have these conversations that start from food, I have a feeling that they are going to branch out into a lot of other directions. And my hope is really that people can like find themselves and find community, even virtually, even, you know, just through a podcast, but find a little sense of community through these conversations. And with that, we hope that you'll go listen to them and enjoy them and let us know. Cook the things, take pictures, send them to us. We want to hear your own stories and we want to hear how these recipes are landing out in the wild and what resonates for you. And you can find us at worstqualitycrab.com or on Instagram at worstqualitycrab.
Everyone go listen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, friends. Bye, new friends.
Bye-bye.